AlHumaidhi Architects is an architectural and design firm in Kuwait established in 1992 and has since completed various projects both locally and also regionally. They are a firm that turn challenges of design into opportunities and strength, and also one that believes in strong collaboration between clients and the architects, for it is key in any project. Joined today by Aziz AlHumaidhi as the principal architect. We will just chat about architecture, about the firm, and also the firm's philosophy. So thanks a lot, Aziz, for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
No, the pleasure is ours. So, can you tell us a bit about Al Humaydi Architects and how it started?
Yeah, well, AlHumaidhi Architects is a family business, essentially. My father, who's a civil engineer, started it back between 92 and 94. And he grew it slowly across the years, and eventually it became more of a, shall we say, a engineering office or a multidisciplinary firm. So it offered multiple services, engineering services, um, quantity surveying, architectural design, sort of a typical kind of office that you would find in the region or in Kuwait. Um, and eventually it's slowly grew up until when I kind of decided to enroll into architecture school, joined the company, and I worked there from the ground up until I took over eventually.
Perfect. What is your or the firm's design philosophy, or how do you first approach a project usually?
Well, with us, everything begins with the client. So the first meeting with the client kind of drives our initial, let's say, just even technical and financial proposals. We don't have a kind of one price fits all or one approach fits all technique. We're really concerned about what it is that the client wants in these projects. We really kind of try to extract as much of the information from them, and for us, that initial discussion and initial meeting kind of starts to drive a lot of the conversation moving forward. And we try to really bring to the table a merging, a very efficient merging between client needs, expectations, and us as an office and as a studio, our needs and expectations of the product, of the end product. And we think that the together of these two elements is really an effective tool for at the end creating, for lack of a better word, a beneficial product to both, or at least the client, the company, the overall quality of society or the culture that we're in. And we don't want to kind of put more weight on one element over the other, because we feel that this synergy is what at the end gives us what we consider a unique result from one project to the other.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. I was wondering, since the firm's background initially was in engineering, and you also mentioned that it also does quantity surveying, what different value that ends up being in the architecture side of it?
Well, it's what's interesting about what happened here is, my father and I come from two different backgrounds, and it's sometimes it takes a crisis to bring about change or to bring about something new. And I think, like I was mentioning, the office was continuously growing, and it kind of accelerated that growth pre 2008, when the kind of the world was on this high. We were working on huge multi-billion-dollar projects with different companies locally and regionally. And I think what happened is our office got caught up in this sort of kind of wheelbarrow of interdependencies, that eventually fueled the growth pre 2008. And when the collapse happened, that entire wheel kind of stopped. The architecture firm that depended on the real estate company, that depended on the finance company, that depended on the bank, they all kind of froze. And we were faced with a choice about how to go about steering the company during that time. And that was coincidentally the time that I kind of started stepping up and taking the reins a little bit more. Um, and as unfortunate as it was that we were looking at cutting jobs and shrinking the capacity of the company, I kind of saw a bright light about that whole thing and decided that maybe this was an opportunity to reformat the office in a sense, not to completely destroy it, but in a sense to allow for the kind of natural evolution of the office to become something that might guide us into a new entity. And what ended up happening is, we did in fact have to let go of a lot of people. A lot of people left us, and we dwindled down to the essence, like, of about, it was about 3 employees at that point, including myself. So it was really the core team that was left and nothing more than that. And what we started doing slowly is, obviously our overheads were cut drastically so we could survive to a certain extent. And then it was essentially reinventing ourselves. And I had to kind of start from scratch. We were doing small, tiny interior projects, slowly growing into maybe a small restaurant here and there. And as we kind of rebuilt ourselves, the aim was to very much focus on hiring people that would contribute to the new philosophy of the and the new spirit of the office, which is an architectural studio focused entirely on architecture, and specializing in kind of developing more of a harnessed, focused architectural sense for each project we approach, rather than the kind of large scale engineering style office, multi focused. And I think that's kind of what drove us right now. And it was about maybe about 6 or 8 years ago that we really kind of started to finally get recognition from our clients. And since then, we've been kind of building on that success.
Mm, nice. So building upon that idea of growth, right? You grew as a firm. Also, how have you perceived and experienced architecture changing over the years? So maybe the architects, how have they changed, the landscape, and also maybe the client side, the behaviors are also changing a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a tricky question for me to answer because on the one hand, things are always constantly evolving and changing, and you can't deny that. But on the other hand, I'm almost sometimes frustrated with the kind of how slow the technology in architecture develops, or how slow the building process is, or how slow an evolution the construction industry is in general. Especially I have siblings and friends who are in the tech industry, and I'm looking at everything happening in the world, from blockchain to genetic technologies, and then you're sitting here in this strange little medium, which is still needed, for everyone. But the construction worker is doing the same thing he did in the same approach that was done in maybe the 70s or 60s, and not much has changed. um, so we're kind of like frustrated at times, but we're also driven by other innovations. I mean, when it comes to clients, obviously, um, there's a lot more awareness of the role of the architect, due to the proliferation of the image of design across social media. um, but there's still, again, with that, you're faced with the same obstacles of a lack of acknowledgement of the work and the importance of the relevance of the architect in the design process. So it's almost kind of strange. It parallels each other because they look at Instagram, they look at Pinterest, and these kind of feeds are very easily absorbed by them. It's easy to just create a mood board, and put things together. And then that kind of also ease and speed reflects in the relationship with the architect. It's something that they expect the architect to regurgitate again, without understanding that there are certain nuances, contextual nuances, client-driven nuances, budgets, site regulation, that are much more of a challenging input than just trying to kind of give them these images. And then you're once again competing with a proliferation of architects that are able to regurgitate that, whether it's through renderings or a quick design. And so it's an interesting time because, like everything else, there's a lot of information, there's a lot to digest, and you think that there would be a kind of opposite effect of more appreciation and more focus on design. But there is and there isn't. So in a sense, clients are more driven towards designers and more architects, but they're still coming with that image of just an easy design. It's just a facilitator of design. It's not really, you know, uh, most clients are very ambiguous and don't understand really how the design process works. And I find architecture and the construction industry is just as secretive and just as ambiguous and very opaque to most people, and for us as an office, a lot of our time is spent educating the clientele, and educating those who come across our projects and our come into our lives about how we work, about what we do. And it's literally sometimes step by step. And we also engage the client during our projects processes. So it's not about, here's my design, there you go. We really believe that convincing them through a logical interface with the client is really a main element in allowing for lack of a better word, the approval of the design to move forward. So if we just show them something and say, hey, what do you think of this? They'll have no basis for their critique. But if you engage them in a conversation that they understand that, what is the thought process behind your decisions, they'll be also engaged in that thought process, and they'll much more value the output that you're creating and be able to facilitate the, okay, well, go ahead, I trust you now, move on to the next stage. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So go ahead. And we find that very helpful in moving forward in our projects.
Right. So I guess that's the very reason why the initial programming stage, or like the getting to know the client, their expectations are like very crucial. So how do you usually strategize around sustainability as well?
Okay, well, for sustainability, it's an ongoing challenge for us. So, given the fact that we are in an arid climate in Kuwait, we have a lot of environmental challenges. So that's obviously just one part of sustainability. We talk also about materiality and procurement of materials, and localizing these choices as another kind of arm of sustainability. It's again a challenge for us because we do understand the impact of sustainability and environmental factors, and how we try to integrate that kind of thought process within our projects. And we do our best with each project to, again, like I said, educate the clients and make sure that this is something that they understand is a relevant decision, and not just something that is a term that's being thrown around. What we find interesting is, going back to the idea of educating the client, is that most people here don't tend to build more than one house. If that's your home or residence, you kind of have one project in your life. So that learning curve is fairly shallow and takes them a long time to understand it. So the impact of the decisions we're trying to bring to the table of sustainability, whether it's cost effectiveness or long-term cost effectiveness, or long-term help to the environment and to the planet. This is something that they might not be so cognizant of, because they don't see things in like long durations, 10, 20 years, decades, and so on. But for us, everything from how the house responds to environmental factors like the heat gain in Kuwait, sun. Um, these are things that we tackle on a daily basis with our projects, and it can be something as simple as just passive cooling, or as complex as materiality, that we have specialized kind of materials that we bring on board to do an effective role in making the project work within the environment. And for us, even the idea of pushing sustainability to convincing clients to not just acknowledge the fact that any material I choose can be shipped over in a month, to understand the relevant impact of that decision, and trying to push them to localize their decisions, order or procure, for example, materials and stones and marbles that are within a certain range in the Middle East, or not farther than Egypt or Saudi or Iran, or something similar than that. And we feel like this is slowly kind of gaining traction, because, ironically, we are in a time where um, things are becoming more questionable. I know the economies are becoming not as sustainable. The kind of easygoing lifestyle that was 10 or 15 years ago is being questioned right now. Money is scarce. Corona has taught us that shipping is not something that can just happen overnight, and it can stop at any moment. And now that it's back online, people are also being challenged by the prices of shipping across the world. So we have a confluence of different parameters that are bringing people in line with our thought process again. So they are looking for a cheaper solution and a faster solution when it comes to materials. They are realizing that in about 5 or 10 years, electricity will not be as cheap and subsidized as it always has been in Kuwait. They are looking to engage with maybe a bit of a more expensive HVAC system, but understand that it is more effective, more economical, more long lasting, better cooling. And so we are having these conversations more and more these days. And it is maybe, again, like I said, a crisis in disguise that is an opportunity. COVID, recessions, economic slumps. So I'm kind of walking that direction with the clients, and we're making these choices effectively for each project, and I think so far it's been good.
Yeah, nice. You touched upon there are certain challenges, right? You said like heat gain and stuff like that. So, was there a time, like a specific example, where those kind of challenges became a great strength of the project?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for us, people start to understand what doesn't work in a lot of our, let's say, for lack of a better word, design competitors locally. So, people are always sucked into and fall in love with the image, whether it's a beautiful rendering or, a beautiful drawing of a house, for example. But at the same time, people are now starting to understand the drawbacks of inhabiting those spaces. So, although people might feel like, again, this idea of a huge, beautiful window overlooking a garden might be something that they really want, and although the high ceilings is something they feel they crave, when they start to build houses of that nature, they run into the issues that might kind of butt heads with them at that point. The house gets too hot, sun's glaring through the windows. They feel a lack of privacy. They understand the cost impact of every meter that goes up in the section. And so there is this conversation slowly emerging between us and our clients, and they go, I used to like this, but now I understand that, and this is something that we thought we wanted, but our friends told us that this is what they're experiencing. So people are aware that what we're trying to do isn't something that's purely, this idea of, hey, I'm the architect, I'll do whatever I want. It's something really in their benefit. And we have the conversation with them, and we tell them, hey, we can have large windows, but it's got to be strategic. We got to have it on the north side. We don't need huge windows looking over the street. There's a lot of eye pollution, nothing to see. There's a lot of noise. We tap into their cultural sensibilities, and we tell them, you're a Kuwaiti family. You're quite sensitive to your privacy. You have to be aware that you're looking at this house in an image from the outside in. But from the inside out, you're going to be feeling more exposed. Is this something you would be inclined to live in, or is this something that you might be questioning? And so these conversations allow them to understand that, hey, maybe that's not what I want, or maybe I do want that, but it's got to be done in a strategic way, and this is the company or the person to help me do that. And so we take on board their needs. We give them a feedback loop of what every decision means. And this conversation eventually, I think, goes back to sustainability. And that's how we manage to fold that layer of information into our projects.
Really right. Yeah, I think sometimes what you see is not what you experience, right? It's about spatial quality, and it's something that it's hard to present at first before a project is done. So yeah, I really like your approach. I think it becomes more transparent now that an architect is not just like a designer of a building or an object in a specific point in time, but it goes beyond that. Like an architect, like you said, maybe you think about like how to resource a material 10 years down the line or like 20 years down the line when the users still use it. So how can we build more responsibly in that matter?
Uh, well, I think I go back to the idea of an architect's responsibility is not just to create something special or to create a building. I think an architect's responsibility is to maybe snap a little bit out of that cocoon life of just being a designer and just being an architect, and engaging more with the community around them, engaging more with the clients around them. at times I feel like one responsibility we have is to kind of come down from sometimes our high horse as professional architects, and to understand that number one, um, what we're creating, although seems very important in our eyes, it is on an equal footing with everything else in everyone else's lives. So I love architecture. I do think it's special, but I think it's a lot less special to everyone than we think it is. So there's a little bit of a humbling experience that needs to take place for an architect. And I think just being more empathetic towards how everyone else sees us, and reaching out more to clients, to peers, and to friends, having more conversations about the profession, about what we can do, how we can assist. I think that for us is something that we need to engage in more. Um, and I think this kind of back and forth is going to open up new venues. It's going to open up new opportunities, and it'll really tap into our own knowledge base as architects. Because I think what we bring to the table is a way of thinking, not necessarily a professional knowledge only. I think that professional knowledge is a cumulative effect of the years that you work, and you accumulate ideas of construction, about structure, materiality, spatial. But I do think that the architect is both educated and then eventually develops a mindset that is all encompassing. I was never a person that was very outgoing and public and engaging with strangers, but this profession has taught me how to engage with clients, how to engage with contractors, with suppliers. So it's a people industry, and I think as an architect, you learn automatically how to use what you learned in school, and to slowly start to understand how to become a mediator of these different facets in life. And I think it's a way of thinking that allows us as architects to kind of work within a web of information, and able to connect different points, and able to put together different formulas. And that's, I realize the more I engage with other professions, it's a very special ability, the ability to work with other people, to accumulate knowledge, to communicate, to put things together from different areas. And I think that's something that isn't necessarily limited to design and architecture. It can work on any level. And I know back when I just graduated from school, they were telling me that a good percentage of all architects don't go on to design or work in the architecture field. They probably go on to do other things, because that way of thinking is a foundation and a bedrock that anything else can be built upon. And I think this is something very rich and very scarce in a society. And as the moment we as architects start to understand that this knowledge is applicable, universally, and start to kind of find avenues and find ways to channel that ability, then that responsibility will come to a higher level of fruition, I'd say.
Oh, can't think of a better ending. Thank you so much for bringing us to realize, the importance of, an architect whose relationship that, challenges can be great strengths, but also more importantly, we talked about growth in the architecture side, growth in the clients, and also expectations, perceptions, and all that goodness. So thank you so much. Learned a lot from someone who's been there a long time. So really appreciate your time today, Aziz. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely. I look forward.